Well, we're going to go ahead and get started, and why don't you just introduce yourself and then go ahead and your story.
Okay, I'm Mike Lescure, and I'm the caregiver and spouse of Suzanne Lescure, who was just, I just popped off over here a minute ago. That's who I am. And my diet changed too when her diet changed.
I'm Rebecca Howell, and my husband is Mark Howell, and we live in North Carolina, and I guess I'll tell you a little bit more about my story in a minute.
I'm Janice Allen, and I'm the proud mother of Grant Allen, who has been up front here some today, and just so proud of what he has done through OMF. And then my other son is being the AV guy extraordinaire, so proud of both of them. You want me to start? Just to give you a little bit of background, I mentioned about my sons being involved with kind of carrying the baton of what my husband founded. He was the founder of OMF. And at the time of his diagnosis, in years before, had been a practicing oncology nurse clinical specialist. And I had, this was back in the late 70s, had done a lot of work with cutaneous melanoma patients on immunotherapy protocols. And so that had been my experience professionally. And Bob was the chairman of ophthalmology at Medical College of Virginia, now known as VCU. And so I'll never forget the day that he tells me his colleague had done a refraction on him because of some blurred vision, and they were unable to get a clear refraction, and so they immediately pulled out the ultrasound machine, and Bob saw the tumor right away. His was a ciliary body, predominantly 10 millimeter tumor at the time. And I just will never forget, I mean, even with the background of oncology exposure I'd had myself, I myself have had cutaneous melanoma, but for Bob to share with me that he had this disease called ocular melanoma. And even with my background, this was unfamiliar territory to me. And Bob had to unpack for me the seriousness of what he was sharing with me. And as any of us would say who have brushed up against this cancer, our lives are never the same. And I think that began a journey which for us lasted 5 years. And, was really a sense, I think, for both of us that even with medical backgrounds, we were being thrust into this unknown territory that was virtually impossible to find people with whom to network, to find people with whom to give advice about how to seek the most appropriate treatment, where to go, whom to see, and it was this uncertain, unfamiliar, scary journey for us. But Bob, being a medical researcher in ophthalmology himself, the way, and I said, as caregivers, I think we'll each say, everyone finds their own way to cope with this. And so Bob's way of coping was to become the medical researcher, to wear the hat that gave him some sense of control in this disease of which you have no control virtually. And so I needed to respect that was the role he would take on. And I think every partnership involves some communication about, what will be the respective roles each one of us will have in this. Who is going to be the one, I think you said earlier, you took on the finance guy. Somebody else may say, well, I'm comfortable doing all the phone calling with insurance companies. Or somebody says, well, I'll do the research about the medical stuff. I'll be the one to predominantly take care of the needs at home. I mean, there's so many things that have to be addressed and taken care of, and to have that communication between yourselves about who will be responsible for each thing. So it's a shared burden. It's a shared experience, and that was important for us. Because Bob went on to proceed to have appointments really all over the country staging the various kinds of adjuvant treatment or different kinds of immunotherapy, cancer vaccine. I've met with Dr. Sato, met people in Seattle, MD Anderson, LA, Pittsburgh. He had, I think, participation in about 7 different trials throughout the time. And a lot of it was always feeling he was trying to learn more that might benefit others. But besides kind of thinking about the story itself, when I thought about what might be some things to speak about relative to the caregiver role, and I think one of the discussions that was challenging for Bob and I was the issue of his need for privacy and my need to let everybody know, so there would be support and encouragement. And because he was a practicing ophthalmologist, he didn't want a community of patients to know what he was going through. He had his enucleation done within 3 days after diagnosis, which eliminated his ability to be a microsurgeon anymore because he didn't have depth perception. But he continued in his capacity as departmental chair doing research and training and teaching and that sort of thing. But believe it or not, his very first evidence of metastasis was a skin nodule on his testicle. That was uncommon. That definitely was something he wanted kept private, literally and figuratively. And, so not only that particular instance, but even then when we were dealing with advanced metastatic disease, he very much wanted things to seem normal to people around us. He didn't want to be perceived as a sick person. And so that was a challenge to sort of negotiate and maneuver that privacy versus, needing support. He did give me permission to have a core group of women in my life. There were 3 women that we would meet together once a week to support one another and pray for one another, not just for him, but for our families in general. That was my lifeline. Those women were there for me for 8 years. So that would be something to encourage as a caregiver. Make sure you're caring for yourself as well. Make sure that you are finding a place that you can be refreshed and restored, because then you can come back as a healthier person to help care in a loving and patient way with them. But I think that piece, for maybe you all too have experienced the fact that when people do not understand OM, they have no sense whatsoever about the seriousness of what you're dealing with. Because in many instances, you don't look sick. And they have no idea what you're going through, trying to figure out treatments and traveling to treatments and doing all those other things. They really don't have any idea unless you have been given permission to share some of those things. I think the other thing that we dealt with was the fact that our 3 sons, one was in middle school, one was in high school, and one was in college. Grant was in college. And we began to say, how do you share this information that's age appropriate for the different children? And I will never forget, the fact that we began to realize that when we were using certain buffering language, because we, as parents, your natural instinct is always to protect your children from pain, is it not? And now all of a sudden you're sharing with them something that will bring pain that you have no control over. And so we would always trying to soften or buffer a little bit what we were sharing. And finally I remember Grant long distance, and he was at college, and we were kind of unpacking the fact that yes, his ophthalmology father had cancer, and yes, in fact, his eye would be removed. And Grant, there was just this pregnant pause on the phone, and all of a sudden he was like, Well, that sucks. Yes, it does, honey. But anyway, it was just that was another thing that we as a couple had to work through, is what is age appropriate to share with children as you're trying to enable them to understand what the journey is all about. And I think what we also found was that as then our children, Matt left for college, and through the more serious part of Bob's illness, we had one son at home, and he was his last year of high school. And he was the one who saw every day what the journey was really about. And so whenever we call the children, and I think this can happen with parents as well or other loved ones, and you call them on the phone and you're putting on your chipper voice, you know, you're putting on everything's okay voice. And it isn't until maybe they come home and they see what's really going on that they have a true sense of what's happening. So I would just encourage, you know, the more than anything else, the huge importance of clear communication with your partner, you know, with your extended family, that is just so important. One of the things that Bob and I elected to do was starting to see a counselor that we saw on a regular basis to help us talk through some of the issues, and particularly as the issues became a little more challenging and complicated to work through as a couple. We found having a third person was extremely important to us. And then Bob also elected to see someone individually, because I think it's often a dynamic that when you love someone with all your heart, you want to protect them. And there were issues that he did not want to discuss with me because I think he felt it would be too painful for me to talk about. And so I was actually glad that he had a neutral person that he was able to go share things with. I think one of the things that I was challenged with was, you know, that as a caregiver, you know, you can become guilt-ridden sometimes. If you're, you know, it's like, well, should I be there or should I not? Or do I travel with them? Do I not? What does it mean? And you can put yourself unnecessarily in that place of feeling guilty if you're not always right there and readily available. And, you know, once again, I think that comes back to the importance of communication with trying to make sure the person you love is being direct with you and saying, you know, give me the freedom to say, do you really want me with you? Or are you okay if you have one of your buddies take you sometimes? And so that's one of the things that we worked out when Bob was needing to go for regular radiation. He might have some of his buddies take him instead of me, or have one of our sons go up to Pittsburgh and be with him during the treatment, or one of his brothers. And the last thing I'll talk about, because I feel like I'm running over, you know, I think this kind of goes back to, you know, what has already been said about just the vital importance of never stopping living. You know, there were many things that Bob and I, in the course of our marriage, being two very busy people, we kept saying, well, someday we'll do this, or someday we'll do that. Well, all of a sudden, and this probably should be true of any of us any time, is to not take tomorrow for granted. And so it became vitally important for us to say, well, you know, what are the things that we've always wanted to do? You know, what are the memories that we have wanted to make with our sons? And so we started doing some really neat vacations with them. And we started making priorities of spending our 25th wedding anniversary in Paris and doing things that have created for me memories that are more precious than gold. So that became important for us. And I think just in closing, you know, I think the piece, I think, for Bob and I that became increasingly, I think, important for us was finding a network of family and friends, and through our church and through other networks that that helped us in very practical ways as well when that was important. But people will only know your need as you are willing to share it with them. And sometimes in our crazy culture of independence in this country, we're, strive toward this, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and be, strong and stoic and independent. And I just realized over time that our friends were blessed by being able to be a part of that journey with us. And I just will close with saying this was something that was part of the OM, the Cure OM book that's out on the table. I'll just close with this for the part that I wrote in here. Loving a person with OM is an enormous challenge, but also a precious gift. You will grow and be stretched as an individual and as a couple in ways you never thought possible. Who can explain how feelings of love for another person can grow in the midst of slow motion devastation of the physical from cancer? From a human perspective, it is totally illogical. For Bob, it became evidence of the divine. God's grace and love is inexplicable in human terms. We strongly sense that to have caring increase, intimacy grow, and love strengthen just as a physical weakened and became less lovely, could only have emanated from a God of love. From a human perspective, it makes no sense. No scientific formula can explain the complexity of human emotions, the human experience, or the presence of God's spirit of love that touches our souls. So often, we never truly come to grips with how much we love something until threatened with its loss. So for Bob and I, those 5 years of battling ocular melanoma were indeed the grace years. Through those turbulent times, we learned how to truly love in the midst of pain and joy, blessings and heartache, tears and much laughter. Bob left his family and friends a precious legacy of a life well lived by a man of courage, strength, and grace.
Rebecca, do you want to?
My name is, again, Rebecca Howell, and my husband was diagnosed shortly before he turned 35. We had been married about 5 years, and it was a very scary thing. I found out in my office because he'd been in the doctor's office for about 4 hours, and I was wondering where he was. So he decided to pop by and let me know that he had cancer. Not necessarily where I anticipated hearing that news. And he said, I'm just going to go ahead and go back to work. I said, no, I really don't think that's quite what we need to do. So the first person to find out outside of us was my boss, who happened to be my mentor and a counselor. I was in the last 2 semesters of, ironically enough, a community health counseling program, grad school program, to become a licensed counselor. And I was in the middle of my internship. And much like your experience, Janice, my husband is a very, very private individual, and well, as a counselor, me not necessarily so. And I had plenty of individuals with whom to talk to, and also it was kind of hard to explain why I really wasn't quite focused in my counseling internship class and discussing clients, because I couldn't quite get out of my own space. So I had my own little laboratory to process things, and it was a really interesting experience as a counselor to learn what it's like for the counselor to try to treat others while in crisis herself. So that was a really great learning opportunity for me, for the class as well. And my professor was very gracious to allow me to do a couple of my presentations on processing that and learning that. But it was very difficult for us because we didn't quite know who to talk to. In Asheville, North Carolina, it's a very small community, and we didn't know anybody who had this. My husband is also an only child and is a type 1 diabetic and has been since he was age 12. And we had been learning in our relationship that his mother and father were very, very involved in his medical care. And we had been switching doctors because he had the same doctors as them over the past 4 years, so that we had a little bit more independence and our own set of caregivers. And it was in switching to a new ophthalmologist where this his freckle was discovered, somebody that was a little bit newer in the field. So it turned out to be a blessing in disguise in doing the switch. But in part of this process for me was, trying to find info. It was very hard to find info. I didn't know where to look. We had really do have a wonderful care team in North Carolina with his retinal specialist, his ophthalmologist, and Dr. Prithvi Mruthyunjaya at Duke. I know I just mispronounced that name, but I tried. He tells us to call him Dr. M, you know why. And they all ended up, actually went to med school together. So we have a really great care team that knows each other, and we're really grateful for that. We had just hired an architect to do a full remodel on our home when we found this news out. I guess you could call it the typical case of denial. We decided to proceed with that anyways. It wasn't a typical home remodel. We gutted the entire house. We had to redo the electrical. We lived in a camper in our driveway for what was supposed to be 2 to 3 months. Turned out to be 7. He had his treatment in March. We had a wonderful pirate party in April for his 35th birthday party, not knowing that that was one of the symbols here for OM, since we were a little ignorant of that fact at the time. We moved into a trailer about 3 months after his initial treatment and lived in there and remodeled the house and pretended all was normal, while I also tried to take my comps and my national exams, really not sure what we were thinking. We were young and we thought we could do everything. But it also was challenging with his family to figure out how to deal with this. He was an only child, as I mentioned, and we had discovered that they were very much a part of our lives, probably more than we needed them to be as we tried to figure out how to fight this as a couple. And for those of you that are my in-laws' age, my apologies in advance. But it was very enlightening for me when we went for the CT scan the day after his diagnosis. We were checking in early in the morning, and his parents, of course, came to join us because they had to be there. And his mother had been a radiographer at the local hospital for 24 years. So she knew all of the staff we were about to see. And we were checking in, and his parents decided to go grab a seat, which was fine. And there's all kinds of seating arrangements in this waiting area. And there was a table, 2 chairs here and 2 chairs here that they decided to pick to sit at. Mom here, dad-in-law here, which put my husband and I as far from each other as we could possibly be in that room. At that moment, I realized that my in-laws needed to be outside of my marriage. And that was a very hard thing to become the evil daughter-in-law when their son was diagnosed with cancer. But it was very, very important to me to be able to fight this as a team and to ask for what we needed as opposed to fight that with what they needed. So for those of you that are dealing with this with family, it can be really challenging. It was a challenge in the hospital. I left, his parents came in. We have a beautiful relationship now, so I'm still not the evil daughter-in-law. I've given them a granddaughter. They're happy. They have her right now. So I made up for it later. But it was a real challenge to try to figure out how do we fight this as a team, how do we present a unified front as a very young married couple, well, relatively young, I don't feel young anymore, but relatively speaking, a young married couple, and trying to figure out who we are as a team. It was challenging. I think it's been very worth it. He has been very gracious to let me deal with this as publicly as I've needed to. I have a great support team. When we went to Duke for his first treatment, or for his plaque radiation, I was sent a huge gift basket with all kinds of things, large print Sudoku and crosswords for him, and just all kinds of chocolate for me because they always brought me chocolate whenever I needed anything. So I had quite a stash. They still bring me chocolate. I love it. But it was really helpful to work in a supportive work environment. I had just become a supervisor less than a year prior to that, so I was kind of becoming, coming into my own in my career, and starting to move up the chain, if you will, or the ladder. And so it was a really awkward time to be, out of the office and in the office and trying to figure out what does this mean for my career. But working with other counselors, I had a really supportive group, and they really rallied behind us, and it was a really excellent experience for that. Since then, we've kind of, some of the things that we've kind of felt a little bit challenged by is feeling a little bit stuck geographically. Me more so than him. I am a military brat, so I have lived all over the U.S., and every few years I get the urge to move. The last time I got that, I satisfied that by remodeling the house and living in the driveway. But knowing that we have good health care insurance, we've got a good treatment team, which is hard to find. Obviously not everybody, I've seen a lot of really great stories about great treatment teams, but we really are comfortable with ours. But also knowing that we have great leave policies where we are covered by family and medical leave, and that's something that's really important for us to have. There are occasions where I feel a little stuck in my career and not being able to necessarily move and grow as I had originally seen myself doing at this point in my life. We are very lucky that we have not had to deal with Mets. I'm hopeful we never do. But we do have that every 4 to 6 months where we have those scans and we wonder. And we spent a long time deciding whether or not to have a family, because that was something that was really important to us. I say to me, but I think I can honestly say for us, because I didn't know what it would be like to tell my daughter, your daddy has cancer, and I didn't want to be a single mom. I still don't. But we decided to have a daughter anyways. Well, we decided to have a child, I didn't pick a daughter. And so she's now about 2.5 years old, and she has reached the stage of, as any of you who have children or grandchildren know, why? And she goes with us to our appointments on occasion. We tend to be fairly young in the waiting room, and the staff tend to enjoy having a little one running around. They have children of their own. We know several of them, and some of the patients enjoy the distraction. It's also just good. I like her to be comfortable and to understand where we're going. And we recently went to his CT scans and took her with us. And she goes, "Why are we here?" She's like, "Why?" And so we talk about Daddy having a boo-boo in his eye, which, at 2.5 is about all she can understand. So, she occasionally gives him a nice kiss on the eye to say, "I'm sorry, you have a boo-boo." And as she gets older, I'm sure we'll find other ways to explain that to her in an age-appropriate way. But that's kind of what we've come up with so far. So now that I have a daughter, and my in-laws have a granddaughter, I'm no longer the evil daughter-in-law. But we've also established a really great relationship with them. My family went through a similar situation when I was in my first semester of college. My dad was diagnosed with a rare bone cancer my first semester and had surgery while my younger brother and sister were still at home. So he had a major surgery, and they were very supportive of us in this experience because they'd been through it themselves as a family. I think my dad was in his early 40s when that happened. We've certainly had our challenges with dealing with the mental health side of things and the depression that has sometimes gone along with this. I mentioned earlier in my question the challenge of advocating for him in medical settings. Sometimes it's very hard to get between your husband and the medical professionals when it's not related to ocular melanoma and you have to explain what it is and they don't necessarily want to listen to you. The older I've gotten, the less I've cared that they didn't like what I've had to say. Just like, no, trust me, I know what I'm talking about, and yes, Dr. M is an ocular oncologist, don't tell me he's not. So it's been a really great educational experience for me, but it's been a challenge. I've been very grateful to connect with this community. This was something I didn't know existed until this year, and it's been nice to know that there are other folks out here that are fighting this and that are doing so with a smile on their face, and that are doing so with such great enthusiasm and energy. And it's been great to connect with you all, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And Mike?
Well, you heard about the evil in-laws. I'm the evil caregiver. So kind of before I get going here is when we were at UCSF in San Francisco, they came in with the news that Suzanne had stage 4 cancer now that had gone to her lungs. We just finished going through the surgery of the lymph nodes about a week before. So that was pretty disappointing, thinking you were done with the lymph nodes, and poof, there's the cancer. Like she said, it was pretty emotional in the moment, but she pretty quick on the ride home said, you know what, I'm going to beat this. I'm going to beat this. And for me, it was like, yeah, that was BS. We're gonna beat this. There's no way. We're gonna treat this like a business, and we're gonna beat it. And so, kind of what I want to talk about today is our journey to here. So this has been a 10-year journey for us. So I call this the Fight Cancer Business Plan. So right from that first day, I decided this is going to be run just like we run our construction business. This is how this is going to happen. What we learned from our journey. First of all, just like my business, I have brothers that are my partners in my construction business. Everyone needs a partner. Every patient needs a partner. Every caregiver needs a partner. So Sue is my partner. I'm a partner in his business. Everybody out here should have a partner. It might be a sister, might be a brother, father, significant other, whatever. But everybody needs a partner, okay, in this journey. A partner is both emotionally and financially. Now, I'm going to say financially a lot because finances in this cancer business is a big deal. And it's the big elephant in the room. You can't not talk about it because that was our biggest battle to get here. Open and honest communication with your partner. It's got to be open and honest, and it just can't be criticized or be negative or those things. You have to say what you feel. Sue and I are great because we're polar opposites. So we knew that when we were married. She's good at English. She was when I first met her, she was the medical transcriptionist at Kaiser. Then she became the urgent care receptionist. So she's very versed in, which is great, worked out perfect. She's very versed in all the meds and all the stuff and she does her research. I, on the other hand, am good at math and spatial relations, and I'm a plumber for 20 years. So, and I'm some people's worst nightmare. I'm a plumber with a business degree, so that's the plumbing paid better than the business degree. So it turns out that Suzanne's very good at research and medical terminology, and I'm very good at financial planning. Okay. Part of this is one thing I want to suggest, and I want to qualify something first. I always have to qualify when I get into things like this. Owning a large corporation and being a fiduciary on union trust funds and a manager of my company's own health plan definitely help our cause. So prior to the start, I was already on those trustees, fiduciary for a lot of the larger unions on the West Coast. Another thing I want to qualify, Sue and I have been highly successful business people since we've gotten married. So we've been able to successfully, both in business, fighting cancer and surviving cancer. So we've kind of cocky in that way because here we are, we've survived it and we've beat it and we've done all these things. So sometimes it's hard. We've had people say, well, it's okay for you because you guys make a lot of money. No, we don't make a lot of money. We've planned our journey. We're not millionaires. We've planned our journey from the start carefully. And we educate ourselves in our insurances and what we got to pay and what we got to do. Another thing as I get into this, you'll hear I've been called an ass many a time to these kind of events too. I sit in a lot of caregiver things, and sometimes, I speak my mind, and this is what needs to happen to be successful. Anyway. What I would say is plan for success, both medically and financially. Plan for the best quality of life. So we've heard that a bunch of times today. Somebody was mentioning that yesterday, Friday. Somebody over here mentioned, one of the doctors said they're starting to work on planning for the fight, planning both financially as partners. So it worked right into kind of what we're saying. And don't plan for failure. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people we see at these things and the caregiver things. A lot of people, unfortunately, plan for failure. It's it's hard. And sometimes we've met people that plan for failure and they're gone real fast because they just made up their mind. Sue had a friend that was going through treatments at the same time, and she finally said, I don't want to do the treatment next week. I'm not going to do it. And she had the same thing as Sue, same routine, started on the same week. She gave up and she was gone before the end of the cycles. And just because, and the doctor, she just didn't want it, and she just said, I don't want to do it anymore, and gave up. Part of the plan and quality of life is since we've been coming to Philadelphia, I'm a history buff. If we come here for 3 days for medical treatments, we stay for a week and a half. The trip is the event. And when we go home, we don't remember what she had done, but we remember we went out to Lancaster for a couple days, or we went into New York, you know. So she has never seen a lot of these states, and so being from California, you know, we think nothing driving for 3 hours to go somewhere for a day, right? Well, you go for 3 hours here and you go through 10 states, you know. Not a big deal. I mean, yeah. We got up one morning and went to New York, spent the day in New York, got on the bus, toured, got to City Center in 2 hours, piece of cake. You know, did the tour all day, drove back in 2 hours, and back to the hotel by 9 o'clock. But we saw everything in New York, and it was fantastic. So those are the memories that her and I actually have. Our marriage has been a lot better since she was diagnosed with cancer too, by the way. So I was more of an ass before. So part of a business plan, what I would suggest, some of you that are just starting out on this journey, and some of you that are maybe halfway through the journey, or at the end of the journey, I would suggest, just like you're planning for retirement, you create an annual schedule of medical appointments. Okay, so really the thing you can do best is if you can plan out your schedules. So that's planning trips, planning schedules. Just like we're building a building, you plan the schedule. So the first thing you do when you're building a project is you're going to build a schedule from the foundation to the roof. What's that schedule entail? Now you're going to create a financial plan based on that schedule. So a lot of you can do this. It's really easy. So now you're going to go to a trip to Jefferson in Philadelphia. What do we got? We got plane flights, we got this, we got that, so on and so forth. So it's the cost of the travel. It's not necessarily the medical that's the big cost. It's the cost of the travel, the hotels, the car rentals, all that stuff is the heavy cost that we've discovered. Cost out of your pocket. At some point, every patient team will need cash for special events beyond insurance. Some of those are special PET scan. 10 years ago, we paid out of pocket. She had a PET scan at UCSF in San Francisco, and it was not prescribed. We basically did get the insurance to pay for a third, but it was a $30,000 scan.
Whoa.
So. And that was the one that really was kind of the tell-all. It's a full body and brain scan because it was melanoma. They couldn't tell us that. Well, we don't know where it goes. They told us early it'll never go to your lymph nodes. It'll never go to your lungs. Okay, it's not gonna go to your brain. Yeah, right. You missed it 3 times. Travel for special. Can't read my own writing here. Travel for second opinions. One thing we did, we've probably got 10 second opinions. If and again, that's a budget thing. You budget for second opinions. You can't, once you leave that direction, that primary doctors, then you're kind of on your own. So you have to be real careful about that. So we did come out and saw the Shields almost 8 years ago when it first started, just because we didn't like the guy in San Francisco. And it just evolved. We always went for second opinions and sometimes third opinions. Travel for special. These are all budget. Travels for special treatments. A lot of special treatments. Travel see specialists. So now once she had the eye removed, suddenly we're seeing the Shields. They're removing the eye, but there were 4 or 5 doctors at Jefferson that actually saw the picture of her leg, the scar in her leg. It was actually the skin is the scar of the leg. That rest of that's the vein that they took her ear off, piped around their ear and tied that vein onto a carotid artery. That's a plumber talking. I can't really. That's so is a big deal. Okay, so hospital stays. So the hospital stay is relatively economic for the patient, right? What about the caregiver? The caregiver's in hotel or whatever. The caregiver's the one that's actually generating the big cost. No, one thing we found that Sue was really good at was finding hospitals that have discounts. We discovered that the Omni over here had like a 50% discount for wills, right? Which was, you know, and if you just go around and do your homework, it's surprising how many of those hospitals actually had a deal, a really good deal for these patients. The other thing we noticed, and I just noticed this the other day, there's hostels all over the neighborhood here as well. So they kind of look kind of dumpy, but a hostel's a hostel. If you're coming here for a short time, we noticed UCSF had a they had a little hotel they owned on down the street that or California Pacific, that they would put patients or caregivers patients up in. Then other funding things are fundraising for clinical trials. So, you know, what you want to do is if there's a clinical trial you are interested in, you know, they get funded by people like us, right? That's where clinical trials get funded. They look to people like us. These galas raising money is where they come from. And of course, the populace, the clinical trials benefit the populace. All right, know your insurance limitation and reimbursements. This is super important. If you're going to start the cancer journey, the nurses talked about this morning, it's your responsibility to know your insurance in and out. It's not your nurses or your hospital's responsibility to know your insurance. So educate yourself on your own insurance. Do as much pre-op with your primary doctor as you can. This saves money because actually the insurance companies, if the primary doctor directs you to all those places, in the case of Blue Shield of California, it's probably the greatest insurance that we had, they pick most everything up. And over here, we discovered that we came into for a pre-op in Jefferson one day, and the sign-in nurse said, "Oh no, there's a 6-day waiting period for Anthem Blue Shield." I said, "What? That's BS again." Well, wait a minute, we got Blue Shield of California, and hand her the card, and she looks at it, and they had all our stuff already. Oh, Blue Shield of California, you can go in right now. So it was just that kind of, it was bizarre. So Blue Shield of California worked all over the place. Well, any family member has a any family member has a pre-existing condition, this is more about our company's insurance policy, do not change your insurance based on lower premiums. A lot of companies, a lot of people make these mistakes. They go after the lower premium. My Blue Shield of California policy I have today is from 1995. Because in 1995 we had family members with pre-existing conditions going on at that time. And so our agent would come in and go, "Hey, you can get a lower rate if you do this." Well, wait a minute, what's that going to do on the other end? Find out it would have raised the cost at the other end. Based on low premiums, sometimes people lower the copays. That can be another mistake. Sometimes if you go, "Oh, we'll go a plan with no copays," it's higher it can be higher on the other side, or when you're actually in the hospital. Sometimes higher copay can reduce the higher cost of the actual treatment. So you just kind of want to be careful, you know, just a tidbits to be careful of. We have not learned how, in our company, we have not learned how to manage Obamacare yet. We're not sure what the impact of that is. Right now we're hanging on to our policy. We have till, I think, February 1st to figure it out. But right now we're trying to decide if it's better to start our own internal accounts, company account. You know, we have 10 salary employees, but we have like 80 union employees. So the union employees are on their own plans, but the 10 salary employees, we're going to kind of figure that out, how the best way to handle that is. Right now we have it's a California Care. It's a similar thing. It's an online sign up. Right now it's it's a web-based program, and guess what? They're having a hard time signing onto their website too in California. So, this is sometimes where I'm considered an ass, but it's okay and healthy to take a vacation from cancer, especially for caregivers. So sometimes it gets too much. Caregivers do not want to hear, you don't have cancer, so you don't know what it's like. My response to that's always been, you don't know what it's like to be a caregiver. It's very difficult to be a partner and a spectator to all that stuff. So, seeing her after surgeries, when she had the lymph node, it's not funny, but when she had the lymph nodes removed, she had this big ball sticking out of her neck, and it was a drain ball of blood. And when the nurses came in to change it, and knocked it off, and it flew against the wall, sprayed blood everywhere, and yes, it was interesting. So, but after she hit, so when she was in having those biochemotherapies for three weeks, or for 6 months, every 3 weeks, 5 days, I slept on the floor of the hospital. So I'd pull a gurney pad off, I'd throw it down on the floor of a room, and I slept in a sleeping bag. I started bringing a sleeping bag in. The night nurses would come in, that's absolutely disgusting that you're laying down there on the floor. I said, hey, if she's going to do this, I'm going to do that. So, yeah, that was amazing. And another one was when she did have the eye removed, we were staying here at the Morris House, which is right behind a nice little hotel here, or place back here. Walked her to the night of that she's gonna have her eye removed and the leg and all that stuff. We walked there at 5 in the morning, and the thing about her is she looks like she does now. That's how she looked the day we went in to have her eye removed. Perfectly healthy, you know. She never lost any weight. She, you know, went in there, and so she was in a 10-hour surgery with complications. They kept telling us they were having complications and stuff like that. Her brother flew in the afternoon, and when they said, you go see your wife now, and then the doctor goes, and this is not going to be pretty, so hopefully you can take this, you know. And her brother and I were in the hallway going, you know, you bring your wife in, last time you see her, she's perfectly healthy. And you saw the one picture, well, that was a good picture, the one with the, but she had the big skin graft. Her ear was sewn back on, so she had her hair back, ear was sewn on. Had drain tubes coming out of, 3 drain tubes coming out of her neck. They had one, out of her neck, and then she had 3 drain tubes coming out of her leg. And she was laying there, her legs were exposed, and obviously her neck was exposed. And the drain tubes were just draining onto the bed. You know, it's kind of bizarre. And so so anyway, her brother and I are going, are you ready for this? And went in and looked, and we went in, she was laying there, and she was, you know, her eye was open. How do I look? Oh, you look fantastic. So yeah, that was quite a shock. Anyway, but that's what caregivers do, right? Okay. One thing I've tried real hard is I'm careful not to get caught up in too much patient caregiver emotions. It's hard just to deal with your own emotions. It's really hard to deal, sometimes for me, to deal with other people's emotions too. So sometimes these caregiver meetings, I tend to try to avoid them a lot of times because they're tough to, it's kind of tough to, it's tough to hear their story. It's very tough to relive some of that. I do not want to lose part of that is I do not want to lose focus. One thing I do not do as a caregiver, I do not do Facebook, I do not do websites. I only respond to business emails. I do not want to get, you know, I support her and her cause and her friends and I support everybody here, but I just can't, you know, I just got to take a vacation from it. It's a long journey. Okay. So events like this OMF, even though I'd like to take a vacation from cancer, are low-cost opportunities for research into your own cases. They're free second opinions. By present, you know, you get to meet with medical people. You get to hear the latest things that are going on. You kind of get free second opinions, you know, and people go over and get Dr. Sato and say, hey, take a look at this real quick. Things like that. And it's just and you interact with, most important is you interact with other patients, other caregivers, and other survivors. And it's important that there's so many survivors here. 10 years ago, we didn't know anybody with ocular melanoma, and our doctors on the West Coast knew nobody. We said, we only know 2, and they're dead. I mean, that's about it. So I would say kind of hindsight is 20/20 in fighting, as being an expert in fighting cancer. So our hindsight has been it. I just one thing, I think Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Project are some of the best tools you can use to plan and schedule and budget things. So those are easy, cheap programs to get, and everything syncs to your phones and your iPads. So anyway, that's all I got.
That's really nice. Thank you.